Hello, this BTEC Sport and Exercise Science video is for Unit 2 Functional Anatomy, and we're looking at some exam guidance again today, specifically how to plan for a question 11 movement analysis, and to explain what levels marking is, because both question 11 and question 12 are marked in that way. So, by the time really you're sitting the exam, you will have learnt the whole specification. And these movement analysis questions incorporate knowledge in all of these areas. So when you answer question 12, they will expect you to have knowledge and understanding of all of these topics. However, for question 11, which is what this video is going to look at, it is just the red topic. So just understanding that the body is divided into different sections, bones and what bones articulate it, joints, what type of joints, what classifications, what range of movements are happening at each joint. And then you've got to analyse the movement occurring in the question, what type of movement is it, and what plane of movement is it happening in. So for question 11, we ignore anything to do with muscular action and this movement efficiency content, whereas it's just the red content. So here's a question 11 that I think you might have seen in the previous video. It's a person going from standing to squat, and it gives you this bit of preparatory information. And literally the first phase of this process is interpreting the question. So it, in the question, directs you to the fact that it only wants you to discuss the appendicular skeleton, because these three joints it wants you to analyse are within the appendicular skeleton. There's no mention of the axial skeleton, and none of these three joints are part of the axial skeleton. So only it's about the appendicular skeleton. It also, of course, tells you that it wants you to analyse the movement from standing to squatting. So just that one downward squat action. And of course, it's worth 8 marks. So what I want to do is introduce to you a young Mr. Justin Bieber, not because of any appreciation on my part, but I do have an appreciation for a way that includes him to help you remember and plan how to write question 12s. So brace yourself. Sexy Justin Bieber plays music, allegedly, of course, but this is the acronym I want you to learn. Sexy Justin Bieber plays music, SJBPM. Now, what's that got to do with the skeletal system? It is just a silly acronym that relates to the key bits of basically fundamental knowledge that you must have to get a reasonable answer in question 11 and question 12 for that matter. So let's have a look at what we mean by these. Skeleton, joint, bones, plane, movement. Okay, so you're going to remember Sexy Justin Bieber plays music because it will link to the fact that you've got to analyse the skeleton, axial, appendicular, joints, classification, types of synovial if it's a synovial joint, what bones articulate, what types of bone are they, what plane is the movement happening. So these kind of go hand in hand, plane and movement. So this is my strategy, which seems to have worked to help you remember what to include and to plan your answers for question 11. Now, the other bit of information I want to introduce at this point is the quality of what you're going to write about and the amount of detail that you're going to give in your answers. So you would get a really sound basic grade if you give the cake answer only. Now, what I mean by cake is the basic ingredients of the answer, the basic facts. And that's fine. However, what I encourage you all to do is to sort of show off a little bit. You will all have more in-depth knowledge than just the basics. So what I want you to do is, through your analysis in each paragraph, I want you to sort of sprinkle a little bit of icing into your answer, a little bit of additional, more advanced, more detailed knowledge, and that should earn you a higher level grade, a higher mark overall. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by this. So here's my acronym acronym, Sexy Justin Bieber Plays Music. Here's what it means in terms of the skeletal system analysis. Skeleton, joints, bones, planes and movement. Remember, those kind of go hand in hand because movements happen in a plane. Movements happen in a plane. Now this column just gives you a sense of what are the basic ingredients that make this cake information. What's the minimum you must know? Well, you've got to know if the joint is in the axial or appendicular skeleton. You've got to know the classification of the joint that you're being asked to analyse, and you've got to know which type of synovial joint it is out of the 6, if it is a synovial joint. It might not be. You've got to be able to name the bones that articulate at the joint, i.e. what bones make up the joint. And you've got to be able to state what plane the movement is occurring in. So remember, we're doing the downward squat action. So what plane is that squat action happening in? And that is the absolute minimum you've got to be able to state for each of those 3 joints. However, what I'm going to be coaching you to do is to do that, but add in some additional icing information to show off, to get the higher grade, to impress the examiner. And for example, this might mean if you're saying that the joint is part of the appendicular skeleton, well then just give a little bit of extra information about what's the function of the appendicular skeleton or the axial skeleton. What bones might you find in the axial or appendicular skeleton? What are their main jobs? For classification, of course, you'll be saying it's fibrous, cartilaginous or synovial. What structural and functional information might you be able to offer, if any, more detail? If it's synovial, what structures might you include? What makes up a synovial joint? Can you give any information about the bones and the shapes of the bones to do with that type of synovial joint and what job they have? Can you give any extra information about this particular joint and, broadly speaking, how much mobility or range of movement it allows, or is it more for stability? So it's extra snippets of information. In terms of the bones that articulate at the joint, what types of bones are they? So you're going to say the names of the bones, for example, the femur and the tibia, at the knee. But can you give any extra information about what type of bone they are? What's the structure of those bones? What's the function of those bones? The planes and movements are pretty straightforward in terms of icing information because basically it's just the definition. So, what's the definition of the sagittal plane or frontal plane? What's the definition of the flexion or extension or rotation? So, there's the acronym. That's what it means in terms of the skeletal question 11 content. What's the minimum you must include in your answer? And what's the extra stuff that you could include in your answer? I'm just going to nip through a couple of slides to remind you of this information. So let's just have a look. You might want to pause the video. I'm not going to reteach it all, but you just pause the video and have a look. So in terms of skeleton, Sexy Justin Bieber skeleton, it is about the axial and appendicular skeleton and understanding their functions and perhaps, broadly speaking, what kinds of bones are in there to enable them to fulfill that function. The J is for 2 things. This is the first. J is for joint classification. So which joint classification is it? And this could be your extra bit of knowledge that you chuck in there as a show-off icing bit of content. The second bit of J is for if it's a synovial joint, which it might not be. What type of joint is it? So which of these 6 types of joint is it? And what extra show-off knowledge might you include, structural or functional? What movements can this joint do, as well as obviously identifying the movement it does in the joint. So this is extra information. Bieber is for bones. So obviously you've got to name the actual bones that make up that joint, but can you give any extra information about what type of bone they are? What's the structure of that type of bone, or what function that type of bone typically has? P and M is for planes and movement. So here is the diagrams of the 3 planes of movement, and of course here this table shows the movements that can happen at each of those 3 planes. So just to remind you, there's the overview table, what you must have, the cake, what you could have to show off extra icing information. So let's just show how we might plan an answer. So here's our question again. We've interpreted the question and we recognise that it says the appendicular skeleton only, no mention of the axial skeleton. We know that it's the hip, knee and ankle, the 3 joints that they've specified. We're going to ignore all other joints. And we know that they just want to know one movement, one analysis from standing to squat. So this is the planning table that I want you to incorporate. Now I've done the sexy Justin Bieber across the top, actually because it fits on the slide easier, but you could have it vertically, you could have these axes the other way around. It really doesn't make a difference as long as you plan. So I've got this is the content I need to account for, and then I've got my 3 rows for my 3 joints I've got to analyse. And that is the planning structure that I want you to be able to write yourself and plan yourself. Again, it could be the sexy Justin Bieber down the left-hand side and the 3 joints along the top. It really doesn't matter as long as you have a planning table. Here is my plan for that question. So the squat, the hip analysis, the knee and the ankle analysis. And I've just purely put in here cake information. No icing is mentioned. This is my basic, okay, so they're all part of the appendicular skeleton. They're actually all synovial joints. One's a ball and socket joint, the hip, the other 2 are hinge joints, and then I've put the articulating bones. And I've put the planes of movement. Actually, they're all in the sagittal plane because the movements are all in the same plane. The hip and the knee do flexion, and remember the ankle joint has special names for the 2 movements, dorsiflexion and plantarflexion. Now, you will obviously know what those means the further we get through the course. But that is my minimum planning table. Now, as time goes by, I'll probably be coaching you to add snippets of icing to this plan, just little prompts for you to know what to write about. But again, hopefully it will become more habitual anyway. This is actually the mark scheme. So this is the basic information that the examination board give the assessors to mark your work. So they give a table with the facts in it. And they also give these descriptive statements relating to each joint. So a good thing for you to do is to look at past papers and the mark schemes of past papers, because you can see exactly what the examiner wants, and from the mark scheme, they call it indicative content, the sort of stuff that indicates you know what you're talking about and can get a good grade. And you can see it's nothing special there. It's actually a really straightforward series of sentences, really. I think I've actually cut a little bit off the ankle joint analysis, but it doesn't matter. You can see from the other 2 that you work methodically through the analysis and you can do very, very well. So the last thing I want to show you in this video is how the assessors will grade your answer. And a lot of all of the short questions, so the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mark questions, are marks per point. So you make a correct point, you get a mark. The question 10, question 11 and question 12 actually are all levels marked, and that's what I'm going to explain now. So the examiner will obviously have a sense of the correct factual information that should be included in your movement analysis, from the mark scheme we've just seen. What they'll do though is they'll read your answer and they will have a think, and they will just have a thought to themselves, where would I place this answer? Would it be in level 1, level 2 or level 3? Do they fulfill these sorts of things? So let's just have a quick look at the descriptions. So for level 1, demonstrates isolated elements of knowledge and understanding. So you get some things right, but other things are wrong. You can break down the situation into component parts, and a few of the points made will be relevant to the question. So you haven't really applied it to the question or made sense of it. There's limited analysis. A lot of the things are just vague, if you like. So that's level 1, 1 to 3 marks out of 8. Level 2 is demonstrate some accurate knowledge and understanding. You do make some points that are relevant. You do partially analyse and make sense of all the connection of the movement. That's 4 to 6 marks out of 8. So that's okay. That's an okay answer. Then what I want all of you to strive towards is a level 3 answer, which requires you to demonstrate accurate knowledge and understanding, Provide sustained references to relevant information, so you're continually relating your answer to the question. A contextualized analysis is developing using mostly coherent chains of reasoning, that's a really long-winded way of saying that you make sense of the movement, you connect the joints and how they help the athlete do the movement, using technical knowledge, using your terminology. And it's an organised answer, clear and using technical language. Lovely reason to include some icing in your work. So basically the examiner will decide which level they think most fits your written work, decide within that level which mark. So they might go, right, I think you're level 3, I think you're a 7. And obviously it's beneficial for you to understand this in order to write in the correct way with the right quality to get you level 3 answers.